To me, to grow, you have to let go. Sometimes founders want to hold, and control everything. For me, not being technical at all, having someone like Nathan on board, like to me, that was like a massive relief. It was a massive relief to say, like, I don't have to worry about that part of the company anymore. And I learned that from my first job. When I say about a lucky break, I really felt that, to me, why did I leave my, the job that I was at? I wasn't paid well. I wasn't, I didn't love going to work, and I really didn't have a say in what I did. And I really felt that if I didn't like that, nor would Rohit, or nor would Nathan, nor anybody. I made up my mind that from the day I started a company, that if I didn't like that, I was going to make sure that I paid people well. I wanted to create an environment where people loved coming to work. And absolutely importantly, I wanted to empower people to do the jobs that that come on board to do.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 133 of the Startup Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. I'm delighted to have David Shein as my guest for this episode. In 1986, David launched Comm, just 9 months after landing in Australia from South Africa. Fast forward 14 years and the company grew to 1,400 staff and revenue of $700 million before being acquired by Dimension Data for $1 billion. He is now the co-founder and general partner at our Innovation Fund, a $125 million early stage VC fund that invests in exciting Australian startups. We covered a wide range of topics in this interview, including building and scaling company culture through trust, respect, and storytelling, Comm's infamous approach to legendary customer service that helped beat out its competitors, what David looks for as an investor, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with David Shein. David, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thanks so much, Rohit. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So David, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
I guess my background started in Australia in 1986. I immigrated from South Africa. I'm a chartered accountant by profession, and was lucky enough to get into personal computers really, really early on in the piece in about 1980, before everyone had a PC on the desktop. So for some of the younger viewers out there, it may seem crazy, but I used to do people's books, accounting books at home, and came to Australia and got a job working as a national sales manager for a technology company in business software. And I guess that was probably the luckiest break of my life. And I had a lousy job. I was paid badly. I didn't feel I had any say in what I did. And I don't know if anybody's ever had a job where it feels like someone's almost pushing you out the door to get to work. My opportunity cost was so low. About 9 months later, I decided to start my own technology company. And when I say the luckiest break I ever had, I always say, I could write a book on lucky breaks, and the book would be that thick. So many things have happened in my life. If they went slightly different, I wouldn't definitely be on this podcast or webinar this morning. And the luckiest was that job that I had in that first job. If I was paid $2,000 a month, I had a wife, a young kid. My mother-in-law told me to get a job like any normal South African. And she did say 2 years later, she said to me, why didn't I give her any shares in the company? But I took a chance because the opportunity cost was that low. It was $2,000 a month was my break-even point. Made up my mind if I couldn't earn at least $2,000 a month after 6 months, I'd go and get a job. I had been offered a job with one of my customers actually at $4,000 a month, and I said to the guy's name was Gary Butsworth. I said, Gary, the only reason I'm not taking the job is I've always wanted to try something on my own. And if it doesn't work out, I won't be too proud to come back for a job, and I hope you won't be too proud to give me a job. And fortunately, I never had to go back for that job.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And funnily enough, it's actually a conversation that I've had with a lot of people who have always thought about, jumping out and starting their own thing as well. I think there's often this impression around startup founders just being huge risk takers and willing to do kind of whatever it takes. But, oftentimes, as you mentioned, sometimes just the opportunity cost of that, especially when you're in a situation, like you said, you were potentially being pushed out the door, that enables you to kind of take those risks. I think you mentioned in the previous interview that maybe if you paid $5,000, you never would have started Comtech, which is crazy to look back on.
Yeah, as I say, I was a new migrant, had a wife with a young kid, and it would have been too risky for me to take that plunge. So I'm forever grateful for that first job.
And speaking of that, I imagine the business landscape was, very different back in 1986 when you first started Comtech as well. And one of the people that I spoke to for this interview was Nathan Scher, who I think was one of the first people that you ended up hiring, and in the business especially. Yeah, absolutely incredible. It was really great having a conversation with him as well. But he himself was quite young, and I think he was only 9 months into a graduate job at that time when you sort of came to him with the opportunity to start this company with you. One of the things that really sort of stuck out to me while doing this research for this interview was your ability to really sort of connect with people and convince them to join. And it's often one of the things that I think a lot of startup founders really struggle with, especially with trying to bring someone technical onto their team to try and convince them to join. Just really curious what that story was in, I guess, how you first met Nathan and sort of convinced him to join very early on in the business.
So probably I should just say a little bit about myself is that a few years ago, I got an email from the headmaster of my school that I was at in South Africa. And he said, "Dear David, I'm coming to Australia." He said, "I so remember how you excelled academically and your feats on the sports field were no different." He said, "Your sister was also such an asset to the school." I said, "Dear Mr. Wolf, I neither excelled academically nor on the sports field, nor do I have a sister." So I think he had definitely got me completely wrong and mistaken me with someone, because I definitely wasn't academic, and I'm not academic. I always say if you put me at any meeting room table, I would definitely guarantee anyone had the lowest IQ at the table. I think probably the strength I had was, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I've managed to attract and retain really good people. Nathan I met, I'm not technical at all. And I happened to say to my wife's friend, I wish I could find somebody that was really technically capable. She said, "I know this guy, Nathan Scher, he's a genius." And I met Nathan, and probably at first didn't connect as well as I would have liked to. I thought he was pretty, sort of said to me, "Look, if he'll think about taking the job." I thought, I haven't even offered this guy a job, and he's telling me he'll think about it, he's going to take it. And he knew nothing about networking. And I said I'd get my secretary to send him some information on networking. I was the secretary, so when he called me to say my secretary hadn't sent him any information, I wasn't surprised. But then he went on to say, "And I bought this book on networking, and it seems really interesting." And that, to me, he always says, was the best $50 investment he ever made. And for me, it was probably the best $50 investment that he made on my behalf, because Nathan was unbelievably talented, and turned out, and it was completely by fluke, that Nathan had experience in going back to 1987. I think he joined, I still remember, on January the 4th, 1987. And Nathan was working with digital computers. It was called, it was a mini computer system. It was, you had IBM with the mainframe leaders, and then digital with a mini computer. And Nathan really understood multi-user systems. I was selling to PC resellers who had never connected two PCs together. And, I must have had Novell's documentation was Encyclopedia Britannica, like 20 manuals at about the first day. It was about 4 o'clock, and Nathan said, "Can I go home?" And this is the first guy I've ever hired in my life. I said, "Mate, there's a lot of manuals to read." He said, "No, this is pretty straightforward." And I said, "What do you mean it's straightforward?" And so for an accountant who didn't understand technology, Nathan said, "Well, it's pretty simple. With digital operating system, which was VMS, it's a backup command. With Novell, it's either S backup or T backup if you back into tape." And he knew, he understood multi-user systems, and he was really able to add value unbelievably quickly. So I was very, very lucky with both the first two technical guys that I hired, which was Nathan and a guy, Darren Lonstein. And Darren actually joined. The networking side was going pretty slowly when I started. So I brought Darren in to do what I actually understood, which was putting in accounting systems. And I'd already a few customers where I was just trying to pay the bills at the time. I'd installed a few accounting systems. Darren came to carry on that part of the business. And almost by chance, joined, I don't know why, but the networking side started taking off, and a potential customer at KPMG called me, I sent Darren up. He literally went with the manuals to KPMG, installed the Novell network, and the guy phoned us, was a guy, Bruce Green at KPMG, and said, geez, this guy's a Novell expert. Darren had never seen a Novell manual before. But I think, as I say, by chance, both of them, Darren had come from a Unix environment, Nathan from the digital environment. And I think, they were young. I was 26 at the time. Nathan's probably 2 years younger than me, and Darren's a little bit younger. And, it was fun. We were working in a startup and starting to get a lot of traction.
Yeah, I guess, taking a step back, again, I'll sort of refer to a couple of people that I spoke to, and it's really interesting that a couple of key themes keep coming up time and time again from your background. So things like trust, ability to connect with people, storytelling, really curious from your perspective, because you, as you mentioned, your background was in accounting. I'm curious where those skills came from. Were they things that you think were sort of innate abilities that you had, or things that you sort of learned and developed and fostered over time?
So I honestly think it was common sense. I really believe that for me, one of the biggest challenges I see with founders, like, to me, to grow, you have to let go. Sometimes founders want to hold and control everything. For me, not being technical at all, having someone like Nathan on board, like, to me, that was like a massive relief. It was a massive relief to say, like, I don't have to worry about that part of the company anymore. And I learned that from my first job. When I say about a lucky break, I really felt that, to me, why did I leave my, the job that I was at? I wasn't paid well. I wasn't, I didn't love going to work, and I really didn't have a say in what I did. And I really felt that if I didn't like that, nor would Rohit, or nor would Nathan, nor anybody. I made up my mind that from the day I started a company, that if I didn't like it, I was going to make sure that I paid people well. I wanted to create an environment where people loved coming to work. And absolutely importantly, I wanted to empower people to do the jobs that that come on board to do. And it, to me also, I always said probably the smartest thing I realized when I was 26 years old was, if you take any company, you need salespeople, admin people, and technical people. And I'm yet to meet anybody who can do all three well. And so no matter how many technical courses I went on, I was never, ever going to be able to install a Novell network. I was never, ever going to be able to write a line of code. I'm an accountant by profession, so I thought if I had to do the books, I'd do the books, but I didn't really want to do that. And what I made up my mind was I'm going to surround myself with people in those areas that I would never, ever be able to do, being the technical side, those areas that I could do but didn't want to do. And I was going to focus on sales and marketing. And as I hired and brought on more people to fill out those roles, I did what I wanted to do. And I think really when you give people responsibility, generally people thrive on responsibility. And I can highly recommend, I've just finished reading a book. It's called No Rules Rules, which is the story of the Netflix CEO, Reed Hastings. And he really had no rules. And I think, I really believe, when I really resonate with that culture, because that's the way we built Comtech. It was empowering people to do everything, whatever they were brought on board to do. So Steve Nola, who I think you spoke to as well, when Steve came on board to run the Melbourne office, that was his office. And of course we were there to add value and to help when he needed support. But it was his branch to build a team. And we had core values in the company in terms of how we treated our customers, how we treated our staff, but everything else was flexible. We did not ever compromise and hopefully that was a common theme that came through from the people that you did speak to, that we never ever compromised on staff and customer satisfaction. But the way Steve Nola ran his Melbourne office could have been different to the way Alan Bradshaw ran the Perth office. Other than those, the core fundamentals of our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, I spoke to a couple of people, and it was very interesting how sort of common a lot of those themes were. One of the other people that I spoke to was Ross Cochrane, who, again, mentioned a lot of what you just spoke about, which is, he felt when he first came in, I think as GM for Melbourne or Victoria at that time.
Ross came in to run our distribution business.
Yeah.
He was a general manager of the distribution business.
Yeah. And one of the things that he mentioned, and he said that especially at that time, it was just such a stark contrast to anything that he'd experienced before, where he felt he came in and had your trust from day one. And, very much the culture was around you come in and you come in with a lot of trust, and that's something for you to lose versus something that you earn the right to get access to particular things or those sorts of things. That's a really interesting kind of approach. And I think it's something that a lot of the other podcast guests have sort of mentioned on the show as well. But I guess, how did that sort of feed in for you from a hiring process, especially when I think you got to about 1,400 staff members around the world? Were there particular things that you did from a hiring process to help you make sure that you were hiring the right people within the organization?
So I'm probably the worst person to ask that question because, I remember hiring two people that I didn't even speak to, or I'd suggested to Darren. They just looked nice people, and I know that the hiring culture today is very, very different to what it was in our day. And there's different to hiring salespeople to hiring technical people. Technical people obviously have to have, if you're hiring a software developer, I know in later companies that I was involved with, the software development manager would make the guys come in for a part of the interview, would be to sit in for a day and cut some code and see how they actually, the logic behind developing that code. What I was good at was probably meeting someone and saying, are they going to fit our culture? And once they pass that test, like to me, one of the key things is not just what technical capabilities or it's will that person fit into our organization? And I think that's what I was good at, is making sure that like-minded people who really care, who are really team players, who really put the company ahead of themselves, who really wanted to add value by working with other people. As opposed to saying I'm the best tech guy, the best sales guy, but I have no regard for anybody else, and probably the best, someone who may meet their objectives but not share the values of the company. The best definition, I've never knew what to call that kind of person, and I think Adriana Huffington, who was a director of Uber, and said we have to get rid of our brilliant jerks, and it's the best description of that kind of person. So I think what I was really good at, I'd meet Nathan, or I'd meet Darren, or I'd meet somebody, and I'd say, this person's going to fit in. And I'd say, for me, that was probably my strength. I'm not good at a lot of things, at most things, but I was good at getting a pretty good feel of people, of whether I think they'd fit into our culture or not. And they may have been amazing people, but maybe not for our company.
So I've got a two-part question. The first part is, culture is such a it's such a kind of nuanced thing for each company as well, and it can be very difficult, especially for a lot of early stage companies, to define what that specifically looks like for them. Do you have any advice for companies that are potentially at that stage where they're trying to sort of understand and define that so they can better understand whether something fits or not? What that process should look like?
Yeah, do what you say. Every company has their values printed on walls. I think there was a company that had honesty, integrity, customer service or whatever. And not long after, that company called Enron went out of business with the biggest fraud. Nobody's going to put we're dishonest, we have no regard for our customers. It's really, if you want to build a culture, you have to do what you say. If you say you're going to take care of your customers, it's got to start at the top and filter right through. Every presentation that Jeff Bezos does. Every shareholder's letter, he writes about fanatical customer service, and that company delivers fanatical customer service. And that is a key reason of why they are where they are. I feel everything, bringing your dog to the office and doing yoga and doing, when you talk about their office environment, just think about it today. Companies that have great cultures will still have great cultures, even though people may be working from home. So I really feel that's a bonus. And maybe the best example I can give is we used to have a training business. We used to do technical training. And someone once said to me, we used to have a chef came in at lunch and cooked lunches for all the attendees. And someone said, geez, Dave, the lunches are amazing. I said, mate, for $400 a day, you can get a pretty good feed anywhere. What's the quality of our training like? So, everything else was a bonus. The quality of our training is really what you had to focus on. Using quality PCs, having a nice, convenient location in the city near a train station. All of that is a value. All of that is a bonus. It wouldn't count for anything if the quality of our training was crap. And it's the same with culture. If you say you're going to look after your staff and how you're going to look after your staff, just do it. There's nothing that people respect more than people honoring what they say. There's nothing people disrespect more than when people say something and don't deliver. And quite frankly, Rohit, I was on the receiving end from you, where I committed to do a presentation in September. And to my wife's horror, she had organized something for my 60th birthday. Now, I always say to my kids, if you only learn one thing from me, it's my word is my bond. And I'd given you a commitment that I was going to be available on a particular date. And I didn't want to let you down. And I think there's nothing worse than saying something and letting people down. And that's, in my opinion, I just think companies that are building or want to build a great culture, it's treating people with respect, doing what you say, and never ever deviating from that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you kind of mentioning that. One of my values is family comes first. So, I think we found a good happy middle, and I'm great that we finally got you back on the show. But the second part of my question to you was around, you mentioned that, one of your kind of core skills is your ability to quickly read people and sort of understand whether they fit in or not. I guess for someone who potentially doesn't have that same intuitive feel or is looking to develop that skill, do you have any insight on how they can develop that, or potentially even what are things that you look for? What are indicators that help you determine whether someone is going to be the right fit or give you that feeling?
Obviously there's references from other people and probably getting references from people where they haven't given you those references, doing some good homework in terms of asking, and no one's going to give you a reference of someone who's going to say a bad thing about them. And second of all, as I say, I think a lot of people confuse trust with putting your hand in the cookie jar. And that's just a given. You obviously, when you hire someone, you just assume they're going to be honest and trustworthy. Trust is also giving people that ability to make decisions and do the job that they've been trusted to do. And I think people thrive on that. And that's my experience. That if you take every one of the guys that you spoke to, whether it was Nathan, myself, Steve Nola. Steve Nola was a kid out of Melbourne, working at Telstra. He's about 23 years old. I remember giving him his budget, and it was $150,000 a month, and I think we were already doing that. And Steve went on to 31 years later, he was running a company with over 2,000 people. We all achieved things we never believed possible because we were tossed in the deep end, and generally I found good people swim. So if you don't have that innate capability, I think you do have to you've got to do extensive testing, and as I say, not just with people that the potential employee has recommended, and then you've got to trust them to really do what's expected of them.
Yeah, and congratulations to Steve on his recent retirement as well. Sounds like he's had a pretty incredible career. So speaking of Steve, one of the things that
I wanted to say something on Steve, Rohit. So Steve was actually a customer of mine, and he treated me really, really well. And I thought, geez, if this guy treats a supplier that well, I'm sure he'll do the same with staff and customers. And that was my logic. That he was a guy, as I say, he was young. I'm sure Steve would agree with me as well. Completely, by the way, he wasn't supposed to be the branch manager. He was coming in as the tech guy, and I had an issue with the branch manager who didn't take the job. And phoned Steve and said, good news and bad news. I said, Colin's not coming on board. The good news is you're going to run the office. And thank God, that was an amazing outcome for me and Steve, because the other guy was clearly the wrong guy. And but as I say, my gut feel was, here's someone who's treating a supplier really, really well, and that's exactly what Steve went on to do. He treated customers unbelievably well and staff really, really well, and went on to build an amazing branch, then company, and then and was very involved in. And I'm proud of the fact that a lot of the team that I hired went on to take very, very senior positions in a global basis, as I mentioned data.
While I've got you here, we might actually take this as an opportunity to solve a mystery that Steve put forward as well. So he said when he first spoke to you, he was I think he was working in what is now known as Telstra, yeah. And I think he was looking for a networking solution, and he wasn't able to find kind of the right supplier. And you ended up calling him out of the blue. He said, I have no idea how David found out that I was even looking for this, but he had a solution for me. And he's like, to this day, I still don't know how he found out these details. But I think, so much of like sales and kind of relationship building is, sort of understanding kind of people's needs and trying to be helpful. I guess really curious to know from your perspective, how did you, I guess, find those sort of things out? And I guess when you were dealing with sort of suppliers and being at the very early stages of business and trying to make enterprise sales, what were some of the things that you did to try and add value to potential customers?
So, I told you I could write a book on lucky breaks, and the book would be unbelievably thick. Another lucky break was, competition's bad when your competitor's good. I was lucky enough to have the best competitor anyone could ever wish for. They were so bad, I didn't have to be good. And I would get a call from a potential customer. And I mean, what do you do if you come back to your office and it's, you get someone says, Rohit from XYZ company called. I mean, what would you do? You call them back. It's not rocket science. You don't have to have a PhD in whatever. I used to call customers back and I said, David, thank you so much for getting back to me. It was like, so what were they telling me is that my customer never bothered to get back to them. And my competitor was a huge company. They were a public company called Datamatics, massive company. I was a one-man person, and they just abused the privilege of their position. So I stumbled upon Steve through a customer of mine who was trying to deal with Telstra, and they said, there's this guy at Telstra who's trying to get a solution. And I called Steve and said, let me try and help you. And I did. And that was purely, I could spend honestly an hour on our webinar telling you some of the things that my competitor did that you wouldn't believe. And many years ago, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, many years later, I bumped the CFO of that company, who went out of business, by the way. And they said to me, they used to have strategy meetings on like what was Comtech doing that that they weren't doing. And it was like calling my customers back. One of the tech guys that I hired, an amazing guy called Dave Colvin. He used to work in their warehouse. And I'd hired another one of their tech guys, like Jeremy Hancock. And Jeremy said, Dave, there's this amazing guy, Dave Colvin. He works in the warehouse, and Datamatics won't put him in tech support because he's got long hair and an earring. And I met Dave, the nicest guy. Was actually, he looked like a bikie, but sounded like he had this very soft-spoken voice. And I mean, I gave him a job straight away, and I could never for the life of me understand, why wouldn't you give a guy a job in tech support? He's on the telephone, he's on the telephone anyway, because he's got long hair and an earring. And what do customers want? They just want good information quickly. And that's what Dave was able to do. And I held this guy back, and he went on to be one of the best tech guys we ever hired.
That's amazing. I was, speaking about customer service and competitors. One of the things that sort of stuck out to me from doing this interview was I think you, as you mentioned earlier, you were sort of 9 months into being in Australia, launching a new business, and the commonality between everyone that I spoke to mentioned that, customer service was really at the heart of, the point of difference for the company, which at that time, again, as you mentioned, you were very lucky to be in an industry where your competitors weren't so focused in that. And again, one of the key slogans that everyone seems to keep repeating is legendary customer service, which I think that the business was definitely known for. Can you share a little bit about, I guess, where that came from and what that meant for you in terms of the actual implementation of that day-to-day for the company?
So, once again, as I said at the outset, I'm a pretty simple guy. And we try to keep things simple. And what do customers want? They want accurate information, they want a prompt response, and they don't want to be kept in the dark. And that's how we built that. And it didn't matter where you worked in the company. If a customer called, we gave them the right information quickly. If we didn't have the right information, we'd say, I'll get back to you by 2 o'clock today. And everybody knew that 2:01 was too late, and that they had to get back to a customer. As I always say, bad news doesn't get better with time. And no matter where you worked in the company, everybody understood those three things. Accurate information, prompt respond, never keep someone in the dark. And it didn't matter if someone was an external customer or an internal customer. As I used to say, there's some people who may never ever deal with an external customer, but a person within the company probably is, and they're relying on that information to get back to a customer. And it was ingrained at every level, and that was part of our customer, part of our culture. I mean, every month we do legendary customer service awards and recognize and acknowledge people who had gone above and beyond delivering customer service. I think it was $150 a month. It wasn't massive, but people really, really knew that. And it wasn't me who nominated. I may have nominated someone, but we'd ask people within the company, who the legends this month who've gone above and beyond, and we'd talk about some of the things that people had done to deliver on that.
I guess shifting gears and sort of fast forwarding, over the course of the business, I've mentioned this in kind of the lead up to the interview, but, over the next kind of 14 years, you built up to 1,400 staff, $700 million in revenue, before finally exiting to Dimension Data for, I think it was about $1 billion or so. Again, really curious to know from having gone through that cycle, what was that process like to I guess make the decision to be acquired? I think you mentioned previously that your wife wouldn't have believed that you would have ever sort of walked away from the company. And, as a follow-up to that as well, I know that you've also previously spoken about how the following 12 months after the acquisition was probably some of the hardest time as well. So again, if you can kind of share that kind of process and what the sort of 12 months were like for you afterwards.
Yeah. So just the history of CommTech is the first 9 years, we were pretty much a distribution business, and we also did technical training. So we trained people how to set up a network, how to set up a Cisco environment. We weren't training people how to use Excel or Word. So we were training technical people as opposed to the end or to users. And we'd grown from one person in 1986 to 240 people in 9 years, which was really a pretty manageable growth. And for me, it was probably my competitive advantage was I was good with people, and I'd go down to the Melbourne office, and I may have met you the last time I was down in Melbourne. I'd say, hey, Rohit, how you going? How was your soccer game on the weekend? And that was my competitive advantage. In 1996, we decided to add an integration and services business to our business, and we grew from 240 people to about 1,200 people in a year, and it nearly killed me. It was really, really hard work growing at that speed, as well as trying to build a third part of our business, which was the integration business. It was also very stressful because we actually were competing against some of our customers. that had helped us build the business over the first 9 years. And I guess another 4 years of that was really stressful. And I just felt like I had. I also felt I was losing my competitive advantage, which, as I said, was maybe I was good for. I really feel that Ross and Steve probably did a better job of me of taking the company to the next level. And I felt we moved to these amazing offices in 2000. It was an old Bushell's Tea building, and we'd come from these lousy offices in the city where we didn't have enough desks, and it was just such an amazing atmosphere. I used to sit by the front door. Everyone, you walked in, I used to say, how was your day? Did you win that deal at whatever? Did you fix that problem out at Macquarie Bank? And I moved to these fancy offices that put me behind a screen, and I felt I'd lost touch with the company. And that's when I decided it was time for me to move on. And we got a really good offer from Dimension Data. It was at the height of the .com boom. And it was just, for me, it was an offer that I couldn't refuse. And we took that, and I left a year later. I had no employment contract. I always said to the guys, I don't want to be here because I'm bound by a contract. I want to be here because I want to be here. And a year later, I said I wanted to move on. They did ask me if I wanted to stay on as a chairman. They said, keep an office. You can come in whenever you want. And I said, being the founder of the company, I would find it very, very hard. I couldn't be half pregnant. And it was just, as I said, it was my fourth child. And I couldn't come to the office and not be 120% committed. So for me, I think the right thing to do was to move on. And as I said, I don't want to say that's the right thing for everybody. For me, I just didn't feel it would work. Probably, and I probably would have said it at the time, if I had my way again, I would have sold the training business and the services business and kept the original business, the distribution business. And it might have been a really good decision because Dick Data ended up buying it and done exceptionally well with that business. Because it was very hard going from working at 1,000,000 miles an hour to doing nothing. And I needed a breather. I'm not sure 12 months is what I needed. I probably needed a 3-month holiday. Probably being naive, I was too scared that to leave the business for 3 months. I think that things wouldn't go smoothly, but they I've been out longer than I was in. I've been out for 19 years, and Steve did an unbelievable job of building the company bigger and probably better than where it was where I left it.
Yeah, I think so much of your identity as a founder can be tied to your company, and as you said, when you're going from 1,000,000 miles an hour to suddenly nothing, whether that's because you've been acquired or whether the company fails, can be a really difficult transition to make. Again, for anyone that's kind of going through that at the moment, do you have sort of any advice on things that sort of helped you get through that period for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's definitely to find something to do afterwards, and and it may not be like I feel what's worked for me. I did sit on a big board that didn't work for me. If I go and take Dave Gonski, who actually asked me to sit on the Fairfax board, it's worked for him. Dave sat on, so I don't say everybody's different, and Dave's been an amazing board member at some amazing companies like ANZ Bank and Singapore Airlines, and he's a Chancellor of New South Wales Uni. That definitely wasn't going to work for me. And for me, what worked for me was working in a small company where I really felt I could add a lot of value and make a difference. But because, as I say, for me, the difference that I feel I make is with helping to build and enhance a company culture and working with people. And it's easier to do that in a smaller company for me than saying, I'm going to go and take a role at Woolworths and try and make a massive difference at Woolworths. I'm not that person.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I understand is, after 12 months, Lance from Holly Connects offered you to come in and help, I think, become the chairman of the company.
Yep.
Understanding. full-time chairman, and I guess after you got approval from your wife to get back in, you kind of went into the company. And so again, one of the things that really kind of stuck out to me from speaking to people that worked with you day to day was some of the common sort of slogans, or a lot of the storytelling that you did that really stuck with them and resonated with them. And it's interesting 20 years on that they all still say the same thing word for word. It was really interesting that Lance also spoke about this. And one of the things that really sort of struck out was that you really have to earn trust. It's not something that's given to you on day one. And one of the things that he mentioned was that even when you came in, you sat by the door, every day would take someone out for lunch or coffee, and it just had such a huge impact on the culture for Holly Connects as well. Again, can you talk a little bit about when you've built up that sort of culture from a business from the ground up for over 14 years? How can how do you sort of look at transplanting or imposing some of those same values onto different businesses that you're involved with as an investor or as a chairman when you're that sort of one step removed?
So Rohit, I think that's a really good question that you raised, because going to Holly was very different to starting Comtech, where I pretty much hired a lot of, especially the early people myself, and I trust everybody. So when Nathan came on board, I trusted him 100% to run the technical side of the business. When Steve came on board, I trusted Steve 100% to run that Melbourne office. He had earned my respect. There's some people that you've got to work for 5 years before you earn that trust. I'm a kind of person who, I trust you on day one, but don't let me down. You go from the top to the bottom pretty quickly. And so the people I hired, as I say, I trusted, I empowered them to make decisions and to run their part of the business. It's the way, I would say to Nathan, if you run tech support, I want to know if a customer calls with a problem, we give them the right information quickly. If we don't have the right information, we tell them when we will get back to them, and we never keep them in the dark, because there's nothing worse than being kept in a black hole when you don't know if they're still working on your problem, if they've forgotten about you. So just keep that customer posted. How he did it, what systems he implemented, how many people he needed, what training the team had to do, that was his job. So when I went to Holly, it was very different, because I came in as I had not hired one of those people in the company. There might be 20 people in the company. And I could not expect people to say, I respect this guy because he's now chairman of the company. I had to earn their respect. So, and that's why I took people out for a cup of coffee or for breakfast or for lunch, because I couldn't expect, and I often say I'm more proud of what I did at Holly than what I did at Comtech. Financially, Comtech was obviously a far better outcome. But I went to Holly, I hadn't hired one person. The software didn't work. The culture was terrible. We had no money. When I left, or when we sold the company, we had amazing software that's still used by Telstra, by Optus, and by Vodafone. 20 years later, we had an unbelievable culture, and we were making money. But there were a few very hostile people, because there were two founders. There was Lance, and he had a partner, Mike. And I actually fired the one founder, and there was people on Mike's team and there were people on Lance's team, and I really had to earn the trust of the people that worked on Mike's team, and I think I did, and I'm proud of that, because it was, once again, it was just being open and honest of why we had to make the change that we made, and some people were easier to earn their trust than others, but I really believe I walked away. And there's a girl in the company who was a single mum, was extremely aggro when I came on board. And I'll never forget, maybe after 6 months, her name was Joanne. She said, Dave, can I ask you some advice? I've been offered this opportunity to go and work in Italy. I said, Joe, you've made my day. For someone who was so aggro when I came on board to ask me something for some advice that had absolutely nothing to do with your job at Holly, I'm proud that I feel I've earned your trust and your respect, and I did.
Yeah, it's incredible that someone that comes and works for you, comes with 100% trust, but for you yourself, when you go into an organization, you assume that you sort of start at zero and sort of build that up from day one as well, which I think is a great philosophy to sort of take forward within business or just life in general. Again, that's actually something that Lance mentioned to me in terms of especially the impact that you had on the culture, some of the like assistance that you gave him specifically, as you mentioned, with co-founder issues. Oftentimes when you're within a startup, you're again moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There are a lot of different things coming on, and it's very easy to make things seem more complicated than they are. And one of the things that again really came out from speaking to a lot of people that know you is you have this really great ability to take really what seems to be really complex things and make really quick and simple decisions, or simplify that process to a way that's much more understandable and much more easy to action. Again, any particular advice for founders in how they can better cut through the noise and understand, what is at the core of the challenge or the struggle that they're going through?
Yeah. So if I go and take Holly, I mean, Holly was an amazing company. I mean, Holly was seriously in 2000, Holly, what time does the ferry leave from Circular Quay to Manly? Holly, what's the weather going to be like in Melbourne tomorrow? If Lance sent me the business plan that he gave me, and if I gave it to you or showed any of the people on this webinar and said, what do you reckon this is the business plan for? They would say it's for Siri or for Alexa. So what that team achieved 20 years ago was like unbelievably amazing. What was the problem with the business? I mean, the rocket science was developing that technology. The easy stuff was being nice to people, being nice to your co-founder, being nice to, and I think that's what people often get wrong. It's the people relationships that become the hardest things in the company to manage, as opposed to saying, how do we get this technology to work? As opposed to saying, I've got one founder saying to the tech guys, don't help the sales guys respond to a tender, which was exactly the situation at Optus, which I could never understand, because the biggest beneficiary was the one founder. He owned 30% of the company, and he's telling his tech guys, don't help the sales guys with the tender response, because they should know all that. So I think it's really, I always say companies don't have problems, people are the problems. So I really believe the biggest challenges founders will face is, obviously you've got to find what problem is your product. What problem are you solving? Obviously you've got to have a product market fit. There's issues like, what price should we be selling this product at? But often it's people issues that become the problem. It's attracting and retaining unbelievably good people in an unbelievably competitive market. And today it's unbelievably competitive, but in our day it was equally competitive. People may say, we were competing against, Cisco was this massive gorilla, and they were paying, unbelievably high salaries, stock options, but we kept all our people, because I really believe we just did the simple things. I just can't emphasize that enough. Don't overcomplicate things. The complex stuff, the rocket science, is the technology the problem that you're trying to solve. Try and make it easier with the relationships that you have in your organization.
Mindful of time, so I want to make sure that we kind of cover off the last few topics that I wanted to go over. One of the things that I did as part of this research is go back, and I found an interview from, I think, 1991, when you were talking about the power of email and customer service, which seemed very very new at that time in terms of offering that from a business context, which nowadays we kind of assume is default of how we continue to do business and kind of things that are important. I'm really curious, especially from, I guess, your investor hat now, and what you do at our innovation fund as well. What are things that you think at the moment are relatively new that will become business standard in the future?
You mean what kind of technologies, or?
Like either technologies or even sort of business practice. So, things like your kind of focus on customer service, for example, those sort of things. Like, are there particular business practices or even technology trends that you think are relatively new now, but you think will become industry standard moving forward?
So look, our venture capital fund is, we don't have a thematic. We invest in, we back people. And so we're relying on people to come up with some unbelievably innovative ideas. And if you look at our second fund, it couldn't be more diverse. I mean, we have an amazing startup down in Melbourne called Bear Cremation. You had a really bad experience that organised funerals for family members independently and said, this is just ridiculous. The level of service we're getting, or I've got the amount that told us it was going to cost and what it actually ended up costing, we're going to provide, and we're going to digitize the whole process for funerals. And so we have an investment in that area. And if you think about how it started, was poor customer service in the traditional funeral marketplace. We have another company in Victoria as well that focuses on digital transformation. That they're very a company called Clear Dynamics. And by chance, by the way, Steve Nolan invested in that company as well. And as he had retired from Dido, I said, Steve, it looks like we're just destined to be joined at the hip forever. So it was completely independent that we both decided to invest in that company. And Clear Dynamics very quickly digitally transforms a company. And I feel that's a massive thematic for the next 5 years. I think calling 10 years is too far in advance. Too far in advance doesn't make sense. But I think every company wants to make it easier for their customers and to do business with them, and for their staff to work in the organization. The world's getting more competitive, and I think every company is going to be looking at how they digitally transform their companies. And so I think that's a big growth area. I think obviously artificial intelligence, machine learning are all going to become much more embedded in technology generally. But we back people, and we don't care whether those people come from Melbourne, whether they come from Sydney, Brisbane, anywhere in Australia. We don't care whether they're male or female. It's the same way when we built our company. And when people talk about diversity, it's always, in my opinion, it's a strange thing, because any founder or any leader who doesn't hire the best person for the job and recognize that person for the value they add to the company is stupid. And that's how we run our company. We run our venture capital fund. And by the way, we're building that fund on exactly the same basis that we built Comtech. As we build, our customers are our founders. And if you were pitching to me, the first thing I'd say is, Rohit, and I wanted to invest in your company. I say, Rohit, here's 16 companies that we've invested in. You can talk to any of these founders and ask them what we've been like to work with as a partner. And I wouldn't say, don't talk to this guy because they were difficult to deal with. Don't talk. We say, you speak to anybody. Going back to how did we recruit people? I'd say, make sure you speak to references that they didn't give you. And it's the same with us. Speak to any of our founders that we've invested in, and even some that we haven't invested in. And those are our customers. That's who we want to make sure we're adding value every single day to our portfolio companies.
Fantastic. David, I did give you a warning that we were likely to go a little bit over time, which looks like it's going to be the case. So last question from me before we shift gears to audience Q&A. So for those of you that are tuning in live, if you have any questions for David, please submit them via the little Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So David, obviously a lot of investors talk about, wanting to work with great founders, but it can be very hard for founders to understand what does that specifically look like. I guess from your perspective, again, from your investor hat, what are key characteristics of an individual or a company that you're looking for that help you build conviction that, although they might be early, they might not have all of the data points, this is a founder that I want to back?
So I'd say once again, I think if I have a skill, it would be meeting someone who you think is going to, being a founder is not easy. There are always challenges, and I may have said it on a previous podcast, is that I'll never forget, somebody said to me, Dave, I'm worried you look so tired. I said, mate, you should be worried when I don't look tired, because I used to be worrying every day about how we could do better. What can we do more for our staff? What can we do more for our customers? What new areas should we be looking at getting into? So being a founder, in my opinion, even when things look like they're going amazingly well, there's always challenges. So it's someone who's going to know, who recognizes that that, I remember seeing Steve Vamos who now runs Xero, and Steve was running Apple, and believe it or not, Apple was going broke. And I saw Steve one day. I said, "Steve, how are you going?" He said, "Geez, Dave," he said, "I've had to make shit taste like chocolate for the last 2 years." And that's, it's finding someone who knows when things get tough. If a founder's walking around with their head down and looking despondent, you can be absolutely sure that the morale in the company is going to be, people look up to a leader. So you want to make sure that person is going to be able to lead, not just through good times, but through challenging times as well. Every founder would have had a major, including ourselves, when COVID hit in March. What was the impact going to be on our portfolio companies? Lots of our founders, are extremely young. And by the way, talking about diversity, we have some founders who are 22 and others who are 58. Some of our younger founders said, "Dave, we've never been through a recession before." I just said to someone the other day that I think there's going to be some companies who say, "Geez, if that's a recession, bring it on." I mean, some companies, as you know, have had massive kickers from COVID, and it's seeing that someone's going to have the ability to lead people, to make those tough yes and no decisions that you may be faced with. Is that person going to be able to make a decision when you do get that brilliant jerk and say, this is the best developer that could possibly have, but he's pissing everyone else off in the company, that we've actually got to get rid of that person. So someone who has the energy to deal with the challenges as and when they come, someone who has the ability to energize a team of people as that company grows, and as I said, that ability to make those tough yes and no decisions. Should we move to the US? Are we ready to add a new product set to our business? So in those early days, you still are going a little bit on your gut feel, but those are the things that you're looking at in a founder to see that they're going to be in a position to lead a team, because that's who we back. Founders, someone who comes to pitch to us, the first question I ask is, what share of the company do you have? We don't back people that say, I have 3% of the company. We don't back managers. We back founders. That this is their comtech. If they succeed, it could be a life-changing opportunity for them.
I love that. All right, shifting gears to audience Q&A. So first question that I'm going to pick out is from Laika Ison, who says, any tips or things to watch out at scale stage as I enter the UK/European/US markets?
So I'm going to give you a boring answer and say that the best tip I can give you is make sure that you are attracting and retaining really, really good people, because the further away someone is from your office, the harder it is to manage. It's easy if you've got a problem in Sydney or Melbourne to hop on a plane. Generally, let's take the current circumstances out of from November the 23rd, you can get on a plane, go to Melbourne, and try and work on fixing a problem. When you have a problem in the UK or the US, if you don't have the right people, it becomes much harder to solve those problems. And I think communicating with your team as much as possible is really important. I think that's the one benefit. Like, I'm absolutely, I'm not in favor of work from home as a permanent. When you see companies saying work from home forever, I just cannot understand how you can build a culture. And I must say, my feeling, I thought maybe because I'm just an old guy, that maybe that's just the way I feel. I feel like that those cups of coffee or having a beer after work with someone is irreplaceable. It's not the same as having a virtual beer. But what I do think, I think that, and by the way, I heard a podcast. It was Ben Horowitz, who's written probably one of the best books I've ever read, called The Hard Thing About the Hard Things. Interviewed Reed Hastings and said, what do you think from work from home? And he said, absolutely love it. He said, I've been doing it for the last 20 years, every night and every weekend. And that's exactly how I feel. I feel, I did actually send our founder something the other day, that a hard New South Wales government is searching they said a hybrid approach, 15 minutes every day, which is actually an extra 3 weeks of leave a year. So I feel, Lisa, that if you're building and expanding into the UK and the US, Zoom meetings are awesome to have more meetings than what you may have had, but it's never ever going to replace you getting on a plane, going to literally spend time with your team in the UK and the US, and it's the only way, in my opinion, you can build a proper culture. So one of the things I hated about Data is that the chairman of the company never ever got on a plane to come and meet the team in Australia, or the CEO. Whereas, if I look at John Chambers from Cisco, he was in Australia. He was, it was a 2% market for him. He was in Australia, meeting with his team, meeting with customers, and it's hard work, but it's the only way you can build that, earn the respect of the people that you're attracting and retaining in the UK. But it does start, make sure that you get the best possible people for that role, because the right people will make your life a lot easier. The wrong person leading that team in an overseas market, because if you execute there, the sky's the limit, as you know.
Great advice. Next question is from Faisal Joya, who says, what would be your advice to people who want to start their own business but have dependency on their current income?
So, I know Faisal well. Faisal worked in our company. I always teased him that the only reason he got the job was he looked like my little brother. So, so Faisal, so that was, unfortunately, that's one of the, as I said at the outset, my lucky break was my opportunity cost was so low that I felt it would be quite easy for me to replace that $2,000 worth of income with another job, and or giving it a go on my own. I think you really have to, if you're going to have a punt and make sure that what you're doing, you have a realistic chance of success. I always say, my father used to say to me, rather earn 50 cents for yourself than $1 from somebody else. And I always say that's the exact opposite advice I give my own boys, because I've seen so many people do unbelievably well working for Cisco's and Microsoft's and Macquarie Banks and Afterpays and some of the other companies out there where they've got stock options. And without having all the aggravation of running your own business. However, I always say, if any of my boys wanted to try something, I'd back them to the hilt. But I'd say, if after a reasonable period of time, you're not earning at least as much as you would in a job, and two is you're not building an asset that you can sell one day, don't waste your time. So I'll just make sure that if you're leaving a job, that you're giving yourself an opportunity after a reasonable period of time. Are you building an asset that you can sell? And are you potentially going to earn what you would have on a job? Because, as I say, even Lance and I battled, towards the end, because I felt that we were getting to a situation where it was getting too hard to compete against the US companies. And I feel it cost Lance. Lance was one of the most exceptional guys. I felt that if Lance had worked at a Cisco, he would have done unbelievably well working on a job, as opposed to just, persisting with Holly, probably for about 5 or 6 years too long, in my opinion. So, it is a challenge, Pfizer, and you either have to back yourself and say, I really believe I am going to be able to add some value and earn an income. Obviously, have the support of your wife and your family. And but if you give it a go and it works, there's nothing more self-satisfying.
Fantastic. Final 2 questions. Second last question is from Nicolette Mini, who says, what are the things you wish you had known before scaling your own startup as far as investment, employees, and company culture goes?
So, I just did it on, we grew so quickly, and I think, and I say that, we were in an industry, so it was much easier doing what I did than what a lot of the founders are doing today. I basically always say I rode on the coattails of successful companies. So I was selling, Microsoft, Cisco, Novell, when Novell was the best networking company in the world. And I always say, even if we did a lousy job, we could have grown at 20% because the market was growing at 40%. So I just can't emphasize, and probably sounding, just recurring theme is making sure that even as we scaled, we never lost sight of the fact that we didn't lose focus on our customers, and we didn't lose focus on our staff. We always thought we could be doing more for both, for both of those constituents and our business partners who are our suppliers. We always wanted to make sure we were adding value to them, and I guess I think businesses scale because if you look at Afterpay as a company, they've scaled because they've kept it simple. Whether you in the US, in the UK, or other markets that they're opening up, it's still paying for installments. They haven't complicated it, and I'm sure the way they're scaling is by attracting and retaining really, really good people.
So we've just had a couple of questions come in. So I'm going to combine, for the last question, I'm going to cheat a little bit and combine two questions from Julie King and Laura Hall. So the question is, I guess for founders, when is the right time to seek investment? And I guess if they're tossing up between bootstrapping or potentially seeking investment, what are some of the things that they should consider? And the second part of that question is, as an investor, what are the things that you really want to see in a pitch deck or hear in a conversation when talking with a new founder looking for investment?
So I always say to founders, you can't afford to be reckless in either direction, because sometimes founders will be reckless in terms of saying, I'm going to be ultra conservative and not bring in another investor. Or I've seen people say, I'm going to take on $5 million when they potentially only need $1 million to get to that next step, and end up pissing a whole lot of money away, and equity, which wasn't required. So I think if you feel that your business is starting to get some momentum, and that with a little bit of extra capital, you could add more people, spend more money on marketing or whatever, where you can sort of feel momentum. I think you'd be silly not to take on that additional capital. I think what's absolutely critical is that you work with a partner who's the right partner as well. That it's and I can say from my own viewpoint, because I was a founder before, make sure you bring on an investor who once you take that money on from an investor, they are part of your business, and you want them to be part of your business, and it's like a marriage. You want to make sure that you're not just doing it for money, you're doing it for love as well, and that people that you really, really want to work with, in addition to the capital they're going to bring to your business. So as I say, if you see momentum, you have to grab it, in my opinion, and that means taking on additional cash or taking on your first round of funding. I would highly recommend it. Don't be wedded to, it's better to have a smaller share of a bigger pie than to say, I own 100% of nothing.
And the final part of that question was, if someone is seeking investment, what are things from an investor side that you're looking for in a pitch deck or in a conversation with the founder?
I think first and foremost, what problem are you solving? And for us, the stage we invest at, the best endorsement of the problem that you're solving is we have customers who are using our product. So it gives us the opportunity to call a customer and say, why did you choose, let's pick on Holly. Why did you choose Holly? Who else did you consider? What has the team been like to deal with? So where we are, which is sort of I'd say an Australian Series A, it's a $2 to $3 million check. There's a product market fit, and we generally, most of the companies we invest in, I'm being selfish talking about what we invest in. If you look at the Australian market, Australia is probably Atlassian is Atlassian because they dominate the US, not because they dominate Australia. They dominate Australia because they dominate the US. The US is 50%, Australia is 2%, the rest of the world is the other 48. So and that's why I said earlier with Lisa, if you get the US right, you are going to build an amazing business. And so, however, I always say to our founders, for your company to be successful, America needs Australia to be strong because that's where all your R&D is coming from. And Australia needs the US to be strong because that's going to be where the bulk of your revenue is going to come from. And that's pretty much why Holly failed in the end, is that we dominated Australia, but there was a company called Voice Genie that dominated America. The problem was America is 50 times the size of Australia. While we were doing about $10 million a year in Australia, Voice Genie was doing about $150 million in the US. And then growing, then you get into the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and you get all sorts of things that make it easier for you to execute in other countries. So I think that, growing and recognizing that international is critical. When to go is important as well. We had a company in our portfolio called Range Me, which the founder pitched to me as Tinder for fast-moving consumer goods. I suggested to the founder, get on a plane. If you're telling me there's nobody who does this in the US, get on a plane now and go and kick off in the US. And to Nikki Jackson's credit, she packed up with her husband and 2 kids against her chairman's advice, by the way. The chairman said they weren't ready yet. They went to the US. They won Whole Foods before Amazon bought Whole Foods, by the way. And as I say, the rest is history. She had an amazing exit and is now back in Australia. But I don't believe if she hadn't been to the US, someone else would have done what they had done, and they would not have been the company that they are today.
Fantastic. On that note, thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. And David, once again, thank you for coming on the show and for sharing your experience and insights. It's been fantastic having you on.
Thank you, Rohit. I hope that was worthwhile for your viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to episode 133 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'm away next week, but I'll be back in a fortnight at 8 a.m. Tuesday, the 24th of November with another live episode. And my guest for episode 134 is the co-founder and co-CEO of Open, Jason Wilby. I'm really excited about that interview and hope that you can join us. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.